Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm sharing a story that you might have actually lived through yourself, and trust me, it's a love story. Are you ready? Let's go! She was 61 years old, standing on the top floor of the building she had spent her entire career dreaming about. And the man who built it with his bare hands was looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing in the room. What happened between them over the next 3 months was something nobody in that office could have ever predicted, and honestly, neither could she. Okay girls, listen, because I have to tell you about Margaret Collins, and I promise you, by the time I finish this story, you are going to feel every single thing she felt. Margaret was 61 years old, a senior architect based in Denver, Colorado, and she had spent the last 35 years of her life designing buildings that other people got to enjoy while she sat alone in her office long after everyone else had gone home. She had been married once. Back when she was in her early 30s, to a man named Richard, who was also an architect. And for a while, people said they were the perfect couple. Two talented professionals building a life together just like they built everything else, with careful planning and precise measurements and absolutely no room for surprises. But marriages are not buildings, and Richard left when Margaret was 44, quietly and without much explanation. And she threw herself into her work the way people do when the alternative is sitting in a silent apartment thinking about everything that went wrong. By the time she was 61, Margaret had designed hospitals, universities, corporate headquarters, and luxury residential towers all across the state of Colorado. And she had won more awards than she had shelf space to display them. And she had a reputation in the industry as someone brilliant and steady and completely untouchable. Not untouchable in a cold way. Her colleagues always said she was warm and generous and genuinely kind, but untouchable in the way that some people become when they have protected their heart for so long that even they have forgotten where they put the key. The project that changed everything was called the Harlow, a mixed-use development in downtown Denver that Margaret had been designing in her head for almost a decade before the funding finally came through. A 22-story building with sustainable architecture, open sky gardens on every 4th floor, and a rooftop terrace that she had personally drawn by hand 3 separate times until it looked exactly the way she had always imagined it. She was on site the first Monday of construction, the way she always was at the beginning of a big project, walking the perimeter, checking measurements, talking to the site foreman, and that is when she first saw Daniel Reyes. Daniel was 30 years old, and he was the kind of man that you notice without meaning to, not because he was showy or loud, but because there was something about the way he moved through a space that made you feel like he belonged exactly where he was. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges from the sweat of a full morning of work. And he had these hands that Margaret noticed immediately because she was an architect, and she noticed details, strong and careful hands, the kind that knew exactly how much pressure to apply and when to hold back. He was the lead structural foreman on the Harlow, which meant that for the next 14 months, he would be responsible for making sure that everything Margaret had designed on paper became real in steel and concrete and glass. Their first conversation was professional and brief. He had a question about the load-bearing specifications on the 7th floor, and she answered it clearly and directly. And he nodded and said, "Thank you, Ma'am," and went back to work. But Margaret stood there for a moment longer than she needed to, and she told her best friend Gloria about it later, over dinner. And she said, "Gloria, I do not know what happened. I just stood there like I was waiting for something, and I did not even know what I was waiting for." Over the following weeks, Margaret visited the site more than she typically would for a project at this stage, and she told herself it was because the Harlow was special, because this was the building she had been dreaming about for a decade, and of course, she wanted to be present for every phase of its construction. And that was true, but it was not the whole truth, and Margaret Collins was an honest woman. So late at night, when she was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, she admitted to herself that she also came because Daniel Reyes asked the most interesting questions she had ever been asked about her work. Not technical questions, though he asked those too, but real questions. Like why she had chosen to angle the east-facing windows the way she did, and whether the sky gardens were meant to feel like a reward for reaching a certain floor or like a reminder that nature exists above the city, and whether she had ever stood in a building she designed and felt like she was standing inside her own mind. Nobody had ever asked her that last question before, And when he asked it, standing on the concrete skeleton of the 14th floor with the Denver skyline behind him and the late afternoon light turning everything golden, Margaret felt something shift inside her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. They started having coffee together on Tuesday and Thursday mornings before the rest of the crew arrived, just 15 or 20 minutes. Each standing near the site trailer with paper cups and the quiet sounds of a city waking up around them. And they talked about architecture and about music and about the neighborhoods they had grown up in and about what it felt like to build something that would outlast you. Daniel had grown up in a small town in New Mexico, the son of a contractor father and a schoolteacher mother, and he had come to Denver at 23 with nothing but his skills and a determination to prove that the things he could do with his hands were worth something in a world that often valued words on paper more than the work of building. He was thoughtful and funny and surprisingly well-read, and he had a way of listening that made Margaret feel like every word she said mattered. And she had not felt that in so long that sometimes she had to look away from him because the feeling was almost too much to hold. The moment that everything changed happened on a Tuesday in October, 3 months into the project, when Margaret arrived at the site earlier than usual and found Daniel sitting alone on a stack of lumber with a photograph in his hand. She almost turned around, sensing that she was intruding on something private. But he looked up and saw her, and instead of putting the photograph away, he held it out to her and she walked over and looked at it. It was a picture of a building, a small and simple one, nothing like the Harlow, just a 2-room schoolhouse with a tin roof and a wooden door, and Daniel said quietly, "My father built that in 1989 in a village outside of Santa Fe. It is still standing. And every time I feel like what I do does not matter. I look at this picture." Margaret looked at the photograph for a long moment, and then she looked at Daniel and she said, "Everything you build matters," and the way she said it made both of them go very still. He looked at her in the way that she had noticed him looking at her a few times before, not inappropriately, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that was honest and open and a little bit sad, like someone who has found something they were not expecting to find and does not quite know what to do with it. Margaret was 61 years old, and Daniel was 30 years old, and she was fully aware of every single number in that sentence, and she drove home that evening, telling herself that what she was feeling was admiration and friendship, and nothing more. And she believed herself for approximately 48 hours. It was Gloria who said it out loud first, because that is what best friends do. They say the thing you are not ready to say yourself, and Gloria said it over pasta and red wine on a Thursday night. She said, "Margaret, honey, you are falling for this man." And Margaret opened her mouth to say something sensible and practical and age-appropriate, and what came out instead was, "I know, girls. I think about Margaret Collins a lot, and I think about what it means to find something real in a place, and at a time when you had completely stopped looking for it." She spent 17 years after her divorce, building a life that was full by every external measure, successful and respected and busy, and she was genuinely proud of that life. But there was a room inside her that had been locked for a very long time, and she had gotten so used to it being locked that she had started to think of it as a permanent condition rather than a choice. What Daniel Reyes did, without even trying, was remind her that the room was still there, and that she still had the key, and that it was not too late to open the door and let some light in. I do not know if you are a Margaret right now. Maybe you are sitting somewhere quiet tonight with a life that looks complete from the outside but feels like something is missing on the inside. And if you are, I just want you to know that Margaret's story is not unique. It is actually one of the most human stories there is. The story of someone who thought their time had passed and then discovered in the most unexpected place that it had not. The heart does not check your age before it decides to feel something, and the most important love stories are not always the ones that start when you are young and certain and unafraid. Sometimes the most important ones are the ones that start when you are older and wiser, and you have finally learned enough about yourself to recognize something real when it walks onto your job site on a Monday morning with careful hands and honest eyes. Okay, girls, that is Margaret's story, and I hope it stayed with you the way it stayed with me when I first heard it. If this story made you feel something tonight, if it reminded you of your own locked rooms, or your own unexpected moments, or your own version of standing on a rooftop and realizing that something has shifted inside you, I want to hear about it. Leave me a comment below and tell me, because these conversations matter and you matter, and I read every single one. And if you are new here, welcome to this table. This is a space where we talk honestly about love and life and all the complicated, beautiful things that happen when you are brave enough to keep your heart open. So hit that subscribe button and come back, because I have so many more stories to share with you, and every single one of them is worth your time. I will see you in the next one, and until then, take care of yourselves, and please, do not ever let anyone, including yourself, convince you that your best days are behind you. They are not.